Then you got the black folks. Some black folks today, it's a big thing now today, saying they are the Jews. So what? If they are or if they're not, so what? If the Jews are or they're not, so what? Jesus said in John 3:16, everybody, and let me clear this up. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and we know the rest. But what was Jesus saying? The emphasis wasn't on the love part as much as it was, and it was. Don't say that I am saying God didn't love anybody. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the emphasis of the application of God's love, according to Jesus in John chapter 3, verse 16, is that he does not just love the people of Israel. He didn't just love the Jews. He loved them, but he loved the Africans and the Chinese and the Indians and the Asians and the Norwegians and the Australians and so forth. This is what Jesus was teaching in John 3:16. He was saying that he was speaking to people of his day, the Jews of his day, who believed that only they were his chosen people. That's all they were bred to believe. They believed that from their inception, that they were his only people. Christ gave them a rude awakening in John 3, verse 16. And that was when they wanted to start. That's when they first wanted to start to kill him. They weren't having that. They did not want that message to become and to do what it has been doing ever since he gave it. Bringing souls from all nations, tongues, and kindreds, bringing them to him by the gospel. Now, the third reason why we preach, even though we know that God has chosen and elected his people. The third reason why is very simple. Because the gospel is the means through which God saves his elect people. In his sovereign decree, he chose his people. But to bring them to salvation, he appointed a means through which he would do that. What is the means? The preaching of the gospel. That is why it must be preached. God himself calls preaching foolishness. Probably one of the reasons may be because it's not necessary. He could have saved any number of ways. But in his wisdom, which none of us can complain about or be critical about or question, he chose the sovereign divine mind of the creator of the universe, chose to use preaching to effectually call his people to faith. And only his people will hear it and believe it. But those who are perishing, like we see in verse 18, they will always believe it is just foolishness. But to those of us who are saved, it is the power of God unto salvation. Now, it says in verse 21 again, the foolishness of the preached message is what is used to save those who believe. Anyone who is saved, they are saved because they heard the gospel and they believed it. Anyone and everyone who is saved did so because they believed the preached word. They believed the gospel. And that also goes for all of those Old Testament saints. David believed the same gospel we believe today. So did Abraham. So did Moses. So did Jacob. So did Deborah. So did Gideon. They all believed what we believe today. They looked forward to that Messiah to come. Daniel looked for him. Isaiah looked for him. Job looked for him. Ezekiel looked for him. And you know what? They're with him right now. We look back. We look back to what Christ did at the cross. They looked forward to what Christ would do at the cross. And his work was believed, was going to happen by the Old Testament saints. And we look back believing by faith that it did happen because it did. But to the world, this is foolishness. Christian, let me ask you, what is it to you? Is it worth it to you to endure a little while longer? Is it worth it to you to hang in there a little while longer? Your life is like a vapor that appears and vanishes in a fraction of a second. Is it worth it to squander away your soul for a few delicious morsels of sin in this life to cling to? We all have things we still hold this resident guilt buried in our conscience for things that we did before we came to Christ. I do. I know you do. So what I'm saying is, all you have to do is endure a little longer. Your life can be called today. Your life can be called tonight. You might wake up tomorrow morning in glory. If I live to be another 25 years older, 30 years older, it will be a vapor. The time passes by so fast. Don't let people or anyone rob you. Don't let the wisdom of this world rob you of the blessedness that this foolish gospel message preach gives us. Because it saves us to the very bone. It warrants a resurrection life, eternal, in a mansion that is inside the house of God. We will shed completely this sinful nature, which as believers sits side by side by this new blessed nature that God has given us. And now we're able to know what is right and how to live. But that sin is still resident